ミサトでいいわよ。あなたは人に褒められる立派なことをしたのよ。胸を張っていいわ。私も。
Hey everyone, welcome back to another figure painting video, and yep, you guessed it, this time it's Misato Katsuragi from Evangelion. In this one I'll focus on painting the face using the whiteboard technique. It's usually done with nitro paints, but I'll show you how to get the same effect using acrylics. So get comfy, hit that like button, subscribe, and if you'd like to support my work, all the links are as always down below. The sanding process here is classic as it gets, nothing fancy. I have already talked about it in detail in my previous video, so I won't repeat myself. If you are curious about something, just drop a comment, I'll be happy to answer. Why Evangelion again? Well, the characters in this anime are just perfect for figures. Each have their own personality, emotion and tiny details. And honestly, the more I work with them, the more I want to push everything closer to perfection. Though every time I finish one, there is always that feeling. I could have done it even better. Maybe that's exactly why I keep painting them. The reason is simple but super important. I use an old toothbrush, a bit of dish soap and carefully go over every surface. The key is don't be lazy, otherwise the primer might go patchy later. After that I always dry the figure, either naturally or with a hair dryer. But be careful, underhead, some materials like to rub, and you might end up with surprises.
怖いのよ。どう触れたらいいかは。私はシンジ君を自分の道具とあの人を倒したというのに。
Priming usually goes in two stages. First, a very thin technical layer, just a few quick sprays to reveal and surface flaws and see where most sand is needed. A thick layer of primer is hard to sand later, so precision really matters here. After a bit of touch-up work, I spray the final layer, the main coat. Each time I try to make it thinner and smoother. It's all about balance, good coverage but without eating up the details. With every project I'm getting closer to that perfect surface, but honestly it's an endless journey. After priming, the parts need to dry well. I usually leave them for a day, even though they feel ready after a couple of hours. I start with the base layer, in this case the skin tone. I picked 3 main colors plus some whites to soften the mix. First I apply a slightly warmer, more yellowish tone to the darker area, that way it gives a nice gradient under the main layer. Then comes the main skin color, very light since the figure's anime styled. Finally I add red accents in expressive spots, armpits, elbows, knees, collarbones, heels. If everything was just one tone, the skins would look too flat and boring. I kept it simple here, not chasing realism. It's my first anime style figure after all. Let me know in the comments what you think about how it turned out. To finish, I seal it all with matte varnish. And one important thing, I almost never use paint straight from the bottle. In 99% of cases I mix them, so if you try to recreate this, you probably won't get the exact same color you see in the video. Plus, camera color correction changes things a bit anyway. Now for the most interesting and probably the most stressful part, painting the eyes and face. I'll show you an anime eye painting technique that's usually used with the enamel or nitro paint, but it turns out it also works surprisingly well with water-based acrylics, with a few adjustments. It all starts with a layer of glossy enamel varnish applied over the painted skin. That varnish creates the slick surface that allows you to wipe off excess paint later. But be super careful, enamel can easily eat through acrylics. I thinned it with local thinner, but the standard one works too. The main downside is that our multiple layers, the enamel can give the skin a yellowish tint. I fixed that simply, marked the area and touched up the skin tone again. There are 2 other ways to deal with it. First, apply less varnish. Or second, paint the eyes directly on the primer and mask them before painting the skin. But that method requires a lot of skill. Once the varnish dries, about half an hour, it's time for the fun part, painting. I start with airbrushing the whites of the eyes and teeth. That's where the layer goes from thin and perfectly smooth. A quick note, airbrushed paint is harder to wipe off because it's finer and denser. Then I take a silicone tip tool, dip it in improver, I use Vallejo but most brands work fine, and start wiping away the excess. The key is to work only on the enamel varnish. If you touch an area without it, you can easily wipe the paint down to the primer, even if it's been dry for a day. Sometimes I use a toothpick, dipped in the same improver to clean up the edges of the whites. I also experimented with fingers, sometimes even mixed it with improver, gives a softer wipe but works just as well. When the lines looks clean and sharp, I seal that layer with the same varnish before painting the next one. That way each stage stays protected. That's how all the elements of the eye are built up layer by layer. The whitish iris, shadows, pupils. Usually it takes about 3 or 4 cycles, and the more careful you are, the more expressive the result. Then I switch to a brush. The thicker the paint is, the better. Paint boldly, don't worry about messy lines, everything extra gets wiped off later. That's the best part of this technique, you don't need to nail it on the first try, you're slowly attaching the perfect shape out of your mistakes. This was only my second time using this method, and the first for anime eyes, and honestly it came out pretty decent. To finish I used some pastel to soften and blend the tones, then solid everything with matte varnish. The eyes and lips I left glossy, just to give a bit more life and contrast. One thing though, acrylics varnish from a thin layer of varnish, and when you remove masking it can leave small edges. That's probably true for any varnish, though enamel ones might have it less pronounced. Some people lightly sand those edges with ultrafine grit, but you have got to be very gentle. You don't want to remove your main layer. So yeah, that's the whole technique. If you have got any questions, drop them in the comments. I'll gladly go into more detail. And more importantly, don't be afraid to experiment. Any new technique feels intimidating until you try it yourself.
見せなきゃバレないと思ったら大間違いよ。あなたたちが学校のテストで何点取ったかなんて情報ぐらい筒抜けなんだから。
There is not much to explain here. This part is as classic as it gets. I never rush masking, quality always comes first. If you have been watching my videos for a while, you probably noticed I don't chase speed or deadlines. This is a hobby for me, and I only work on it when I really have the time. But maybe that's why I enjoy the results even more. Everything turns out cleaner, and airbrush coverage gives that smooth, even surface you just can get with a brush. Plus, the moment when you finally peel off the mask is always exciting. You never know if it came out exactly as planned or if some color went a bit off. But honestly, that's part of the fun. At that stage, most of the hard work is already done. All that's left are the small details. I didn't experiment much here, just added a few soft gradients and highlights, but not persistently. The main goal was to keep the surface clean and the lines sharp after all that masking. Sometimes I want to push the contrast more, make it brighter, but it's important to stop at the right moment. Otherwise, the figure starts looking overcooked. In anime style painting, balance and cleanliness matter most.
「久しぶりに3人揃ったってのにギスギスしてるわね。
I made the decals myself. It's honestly one of my favorite ways to add tiny detail. Print the design, cut it out, soak it in water for a moment, then carefully place it on the figure. The tricky part is preparing the artwork, but after that it's simple. Place it, adjust it, smooth it out and seal it. Exactly like you see in the video. And if I ever do another anime figure, I'll definitely use decals for the eyes next time. The result is cleaner, sharper and perfectly symmetrical. Something that's nearly impossible to achieve with a brush. Only the small atmosphere pieces left now. I tried to keep everything quick and simple. The main thing was to preserve the overall balance of the composition. For the table, I used a stencil to get a wood texture. But the stencil size didn't quite fit and I couldn't fix it tightly. So the pattern came out a bit uneven, though honestly it has its own charm. The dishes turned out surprisingly cool. While painting the table, a few drops of paint hit them, and it created a subtle cracked ceramic effect. Barely visible on camera but looks very realistic in person. For the soap in the bowls I mixed a bit of epoxy with some ingredients for realism. It came out fun and lively.
気づいたのよ。カジ君が私の父に似てる。
And finally, time to put everything together. On camera I didn't glue it all permanently, just assembled it roughly so you could see the final look sooner. Off camera though, everything was glued carefully in place. That moment always brings a feeling of closure, when all the separate pieces finally come together into a complete scene. If you have got any ideas for which figure I should do next, drop them in the comments. You can even suggest something specific. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always I'll see you in the next project. Take care and see you soon!